As I leaned forward to kiss the man I was about to spend the rest of my life with, a voice shouted from the back of the church, "Don't kiss him." Every sound vanished. The piano stopped. The priest froze mid-sentence. My hand trembled in his, and my heart began to pound so loudly it drowned everything else out. Everyone turned toward the back, and standing there, drenched from the rain, was a woman in a white wedding dress, just like mine. Her makeup was running, her veil half torn, and her voice cracked as she said, "You can't marry him. He's already my husband." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, confusion. People stood up in shock. My knees went weak. I looked at Ryan, the man I was seconds away from marrying, and his face had gone pale. He didn't even turn to look at her. He just stood there, frozen. That was the moment my world stopped. I thought I knew him. I thought I was marrying the love of my life. But I was about to learn that the man standing at the altar wasn't who I thought he was. If you want to know what happened next, and how one lie destroyed everything I believed in, stay till the end. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. My name is Isla Monroe, and I thought I was the luckiest woman in the world. I own a small flower shop in Charleston, South Carolina, a cozy place filled with color, scent, and the kind of peace that makes you forget the world outside. For years, it was just me and my dad, George, after my mom passed away when I was 17. My dad raised me to be kind, strong, and careful with people. But when it came to love, I was too trusting. Ryan walked into my life one spring morning, and from the first moment, he felt like a dream I didn't know I had. He came into my shop holding a cup of coffee, saying he wanted to buy flowers for his mother's birthday. He had this easy smile, warm eyes, and the kind of voice that made you believe every word he said. He kept coming back, sometimes for flowers, sometimes just to talk. We'd spend hours chatting about small things. His job, his travels, his favorite songs. He told me he worked as a contractor who often traveled for projects. It sounded exciting, and I admired his dedication. Over time, he started showing up every morning with my favorite drink, lavender coffee. He remembered little details, like the scar on my wrist from when I burned myself arranging candles, or the song I hummed when I was nervous. It felt like he saw me when no one else did. 6 months later, he asked me to dinner. I said yes without hesitation. We sat by the harbor that night, watching boats move slowly across the water. When I told him about my mom, he reached across the table and said softly, "She'd be proud of the woman you've become." That was the night I fell for him completely. A year later, he proposed in the small rose garden behind my shop, the same place we first met. He got down on one knee with a ring so simple yet beautiful that I cried before I could even say yes. "You're the only thing that's ever made sense in my life," he said. It sounded honest, real. My dad was cautious, though. He'd met Ryan a few times, and while he was polite, he didn't hide his concern. Men who seem perfect usually aren't, Dad told me one evening as we boxed up wedding invitations. I laughed it off and said, "You just think no one's good enough for your daughter." He smiled faintly, but didn't argue. I wish I'd listened to that silence. The weeks leading up to the wedding were everything I'd dreamed of. I was surrounded by flowers, friends, and laughter. My best friend Haley helped me pick the dress, a soft ivory gown with lace sleeves that made me feel like something out of a fairy tale. She teased me as we stood in front of the mirror. "You're glowing," she said. "He's either your soulmate or he's hypnotized you." We both laughed, but now I can't forget how right she was in both ways. Ryan had a way of making everyone feel special. The pastor liked him. My bridesmaids adored him. Even strangers seemed to trust him immediately. But there were small moments, tiny cracks, that I ignored. Nights when he didn't answer his phone, saying he was working late. A time when he came home smelling like a perfume I didn't own. When I asked about it, he smiled and said, "You're imagining things." And I believed him. The night before the wedding, he was nervous. "I just want everything to be perfect," he said, pacing in our living room. I told him it already was. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "You have no idea how much you mean to me." When I woke up the next morning, it felt like the start of forever. The church bells rang. The air was filled with the smell of roses, and my dad took my arm, whispering, "You ready, kiddo?" I smiled through happy tears. I've never been more ready. The ceremony was beautiful. The music, the vows, the soft light pouring through the stained glass windows. It all felt magical. Ryan looked perfect standing at the altar, his eyes on me, his smile calm and sure. When the priest said, "You may now kiss the bride," I leaned forward, heart pounding with joy. And then came that voice from the back, "Don't kiss him." Every head turned. My hand froze inches from his cheek. The woman in the doorway was crying, her voice breaking as she shouted, "He's already my husband." The room fell into chaos. Guests whispered. Some stood in shock, and the world around me spun. I looked at Ryan. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even shocked. He just closed his eyes, like a man who knew his lies had finally caught up with him. And that's when I realized my wedding was never real. It was the final act in someone else's story. The church erupted in whispers and gasps. Guests turned toward the woman standing at the back, her voice trembling but loud enough to echo through the high ceilings. "He's already married to me," she repeated, holding up a small white envelope in her shaking hand. My bouquet slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. I could barely move. My mind was spinning, trying to catch up with what I was seeing. The woman, tall, pale, and drenched from the rain, started walking down the aisle. Each step echoed like a heartbeat. My heart. I wanted to shout at her to stop, to tell me this was a mistake, but I couldn't find my voice. Everyone's eyes darted between her and Ryan. My father stepped forward, his jaw tight. "What is this?" he demanded. "Who are you?" The woman stopped a few feet away, her voice breaking. "My name is Lena Cole. I'm his wife." For a second, I didn't even breathe. The priest's hands shook, the guests gasped, and Ryan's shoulders tensed. He didn't say a word. Not one. My father turned to him sharply. "Ryan, is she telling the truth?" Ryan's eyes darted between me and Lena. "It's not what it looks like," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "Then what is it?" I snapped, my voice trembling. "Who is she?" Lena's tears streamed down her face. "You really don't know, do you?" she said softly, looking at me with a kind of pity that made me sick. "We've been married for 2 years. I only found out about this wedding last week. I thought it was a cruel rumor until I saw the photos online." She held up the envelope. It was a marriage certificate. "He promised me we'd renew our vows this year, but instead, he's here, marrying someone else." The church fell silent, except for the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. Ryan reached out, his voice desperate. "Ava, I can explain." I stepped back. "Explain what? That you forgot you were already married? That you've been living a double life?" His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time, I saw something real in his eyes. Not charm or confidence, but fear. My father stepped in front of me, his voice sharp and protective. "You've said enough. You lied to my daughter, used her, and dragged her into whatever mess you've made." Lena glared at him. "You said you were divorced, Ryan. You said it was over." He ran a hand through his hair. "It was over, Lena. We weren't working. You knew that. But you never signed the papers," she shouted back, her voice breaking, "because you never filed them." The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. He hadn't even bothered to make it legal. I had been planning a wedding with a man who still belonged to someone else. People began leaving their seats, murmuring to each other. Someone whispered, "This is insane." And another said, "Poor girl." I could feel their eyes on me, their sympathy burning my skin like fire. I looked down at the ring on my hand, the ring that now felt like a lie. "Is any of this real?" I asked quietly. "Did you ever love me?" Ryan looked at me with watery eyes. "Yes, of course I did. You have to believe that." I shook my head. "I believed everything you said, and that's my mistake. You fooled me, Ryan. You fooled both of us." Lena's voice softened. "You're not the first, you know. There was another woman before me. He told me she didn't matter. Now I know he's been doing this for years, moving from city to city, finding women like us, telling the same stories." My stomach turned. "What are you talking about?" She handed me a small photograph from her envelope. It showed Ryan standing next to another woman in front of a different church. He looked exactly the same suit, same smile, only the bride was different. The crowd gasped again. The weight of it all hit me at once. My vision blurred, and I stumbled slightly. My father caught me, holding me steady. "That's enough," he said. "You're done humiliating her." But I wasn't humiliated. I was enraged. My whole life, my business, my trust had been tied to this man. I had loved him with everything I had, and he had turned it into a con. Ryan reached for me one last time, his voice trembling. "Ava, I swear I can fix this." I stepped back, shaking my head. You can't fix something that was never real. The police arrived a few minutes later, summoned by Lena's brother, who had followed her to the wedding. They questioned Ryan quietly in the corner as I stood there, my bouquet still on the ground, the petals crushed under my shoes. He turned to look at me one last time before they took him outside. His lips moved like he wanted to say something, but I didn't care anymore. I turned away. Haley came up behind me, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. "Come on," she whispered. "You don't have to stay here." I nodded, my body trembling. My father guided me down the aisle, the same one I had walked moments ago with hope in my heart. Now I was walking it again, but this time with nothing left except heartbreak and disbelief. As we stepped outside into the cool rain, I looked back at the church one last time. The decorations, the music, the flowers, it all looked beautiful, but none of it mattered. It was just a stage for the biggest lie of my life. That day, I didn't just lose a wedding. I lost the person I thought I was marrying, and maybe even the version of myself that believed love couldn't lie. The next morning, I woke up in my old bedroom at my father's house, surrounded by the same pale blue walls I had painted as a teenager. My head was pounding, my eyes swollen from crying. Everything from the day before replayed in my mind. The shouting, the looks of pity from the guests, Ryan's empty eyes as he was taken away. It felt like a bad dream, but the pain in my chest reminded me it was real. My father had made breakfast, but I couldn't eat. He sat across from me quietly, sipping his coffee, until he finally said, "You have two choices, Isla. You can let this destroy you, or you can find out the truth and end this on your terms." His words hit hard. For weeks, I had let Ryan's version of love control me. I had believed every word he said because it felt easier than asking questions. But not anymore. I looked up at my dad and said, "I need to know everything. I can't move on until I understand who he really is." He nodded, "Then start digging." That same afternoon, I went back to the house I had shared with Ryan. The wedding decorations were still there, half-melted candles, scattered petals, and unopened gifts from guests who had left in confusion. The sight made my stomach twist. I packed my things quietly, but I couldn't leave without answers. I opened Ryan's desk, searching through drawers and folders until I found a small black notebook hidden beneath old receipts. Inside were names, phone numbers, and cities. Some were crossed out, others circled. I recognized Lena's name, and one other I didn't. Madison H. Next to it was a date from 3 years ago, and the word closed. I didn't know what that meant, but my gut told me it wasn't good. Haley came over later that evening. She hugged me tightly, then looked me in the eye. "Are you sure you want to do this? Sometimes knowing everything hurts worse than not knowing." I shook my head. "I've lived enough lies, Haley. I need the truth." We spent the next few hours calling every number in that notebook. Most were disconnected, but one woman answered. A woman named Madison Hale. Her voice was cautious when I introduced myself. "I'm sorry to bother you," I said softly, "but did you know someone named Ryan Cole?" There was a pause. "Why are you asking?" "Because he almost became my husband." She let out a bitter laugh. "Then you're lucky. He was mine." The words hit like a brick. I asked if she could meet me, and she agreed. We met the next day at a small diner on the edge of town. Madison was older than me, with tired eyes and a calm sadness about her. She stirred her coffee slowly before speaking. "He married me 5 years ago," she said. "Told me he was a businessman, that he traveled for work. Then one day he disappeared. I filed a missing person report. A few months later, I found out he was alive and living under a different name." My chest tightened. Ryan Cole? She nodded. That's one of them. He's used others. I spent years trying to track him down. Every time I got close, he slipped away. You're not the first, Isla, but maybe you can be the last. Madison handed me a small envelope. Inside were photos. Different women, different towns, but always the same man. Same smile, same suit, same lies. I felt sick. How did you survive this? I asked, barely above a whisper. She smiled sadly. By realizing it wasn't my fault. He took advantage of people who see the good in others. You can't blame yourself for loving someone who never really existed. When I left the diner, I sat in my car for a long time, staring out at the rain. My whole world had collapsed, but for the first time, I felt something other than pain. I felt determination. That night, I called Lena. Her voice was cautious but not angry. I told her about the notebook, about Madison, about the photos. There was a long silence before she said, "He fooled us all, didn't he?" "Yes," I said, "but we don't have to let him keep doing it." We agreed to meet at the police station the next morning to give them everything we had, his documents, the notebook, and Madison's testimony. When we arrived, I saw Lena waiting outside. She looked as tired as I felt, but there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. We walked in together. I gave the officer the evidence and told him everything. Every lie, every secret, every manipulation. When I was done, he nodded and said they'd reopen the case. Walking out of that station felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in months. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I had taken back control of my life. That night, my dad cooked dinner again. He didn't say much, just looked at me across the table and said, "I'm proud of you." I smiled weakly. For what? For standing up when everything in you wanted to fall apart. As I sat there, I realized he was right. Ryan had taken a lot from me. My trust, my peace, my dreams, but not my strength. That was mine to keep. Before going to bed, I opened my laptop and deleted every photo of Ryan, every trace of him. And when I finally turned off the light, I whispered to myself, this is where the healing starts. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time, I was the one writing the story. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and long, sleepless nights. Every time my phone rang, my heart jumped. I kept expecting to hear that Ryan had vanished again, or that the police couldn't find enough evidence to charge him. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth surfaced. Every secret he had buried was starting to come undone. One rainy afternoon, I was at my flower shop, restocking tulips, when the bell above the door rang. I looked up and froze. It was Lena. She looked different, calmer, almost at peace. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded and led her to the back office. She sat across from me, wringing her hands nervously before speaking. "They found him," she said quietly. My stomach twisted. "He's in custody. The police caught him trying to leave the state under a fake name." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I had waited for this news, imagined it, but now that it was real, it didn't feel satisfying. It just felt heavy. "What happens now?" I asked. "He's facing multiple charges: fraud, identity theft, bigamy, forgery. They found documents, fake IDs, everything. The detective said it's one of the most elaborate cons he's ever seen." She hesitated. "He asked to see us. Both of us." The words made my heart stop. "Us? Why?" She shook her head. "I don't know. Closure, maybe. Or control. But they said we could go together." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to see him one last time, to look him in the eyes and ask how he could do something so cruel. Another part of me wanted to pretend he no longer existed. But after everything I'd been through, I realized this was my chance to close the chapter completely. "I'll go," I said finally. 2 days later, we sat across from him in a small gray interrogation room at the county jail. Ryan, or whatever his real name was, looked nothing like the man I had fallen in love with. His once perfect hair was disheveled, his face pale and tired, but his eyes, those same calm, confident eyes, still carried that strange power that had fooled me before. He smiled faintly. "You both look well," he said, his voice smooth, as if we were old friends meeting for coffee. I didn't respond. I just stared at him, waiting. Lena crossed her arms. Why did you do it, Ryan? To us? To everyone? He leaned back in his chair, sighing like a man bored with the question. Because I could, he said simply. People want to believe in love. You give them what they want to see, and they'll follow you anywhere. My stomach turned. You used love as a weapon, I said quietly. He met my gaze, unflinching. Love is the easiest lie to sell. You were lonely, Isla. You wanted a man who listened, who remembered the little things. I gave you that. You gave me trust. That's all I needed. I clenched my fists under the table. You stole years of my life. You played with people's hearts like they were disposable. He smirked. And yet, here you are, still sitting across from me. That was it. That was who he really was. Not the man who made me coffee in the mornings. Not the man who kissed my forehead before bed. This was the real Ryan Cole. A hollow man who fed on control and chaos. Lena's voice broke through my thoughts. You're going to spend the rest of your life paying for what you did. He tilted his head slightly, that same false calm in his voice. You'll move on, Lena. You too, Isla. You'll tell yourselves you're stronger now, but you'll always remember me. Something in me snapped. I stood up, leaning across the table. No, I said firmly. I'll remember the woman I was before you tried to break her. I'll remember how it felt to lose everything and still find the strength to stand. You don't own a single part of me anymore. For the first time, his smile faltered. His eyes darted away. Maybe he realized his power over me was gone. Maybe that scared him more than anything else. The guard called time. Lena and I stood to leave. As we walked toward the door, Ryan called out, Isla. I paused but didn't turn around. You really did look beautiful that day, he said softly. I walked out without a word. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing even an ounce of emotion. Outside, the air was cold and crisp. Lena exhaled shakily. You did it, she said. You faced him. I nodded, staring up at the cloudy sky. We both did. Over the next few weeks, life started to slowly settle back into something that resembled normal. Ryan was officially charged and convicted. The media picked up the story for a few days, labeling him the wedding con man. But soon, people moved on. I stayed quiet through it all, focusing on rebuilding what he had tried to take from me. My business, my peace, my faith in myself. One afternoon, as I was arranging flowers in the shop window, my dad walked in holding a cup of coffee. The place looks good, he said, handing it to me. You look better. I smiled. I'm getting there. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, Your mom would have been proud of you, you know. That one sentence made all the pain worth it. I realized then that closure doesn't come from revenge or apologies. It comes from deciding that the past no longer deserves your power. That night, I stood on the porch watching the sun go down, the sky glowing orange and pink over the trees. For months, I had been living in the shadow of betrayal, but now, standing there, I finally felt something new. Peace. Ryan had taken a part of my story. Yes, but not my ending. That belonged entirely to me. And as the first stars began to appear, I whispered into the fading light, You were right, Dad. I didn't let it destroy me. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. Months passed after the trial, but some days still felt like that first morning after the wedding. Quiet, heavy, unreal. The scandal had become small-town gossip for a while, whispered over grocery counters and coffee shop tables. But eventually, the world moved on. I stayed behind to pick up the pieces of my life. Every time I walked past the church or saw a white dress hanging in a store window, something inside me twisted. But I wasn't broken anymore. I was healing. At first, healing felt like nothing, just emptiness, where all the chaos had been. I went through my days on autopilot, opening my flower shop, watering plants, smiling at customers who probably didn't know what to say to me. My best friend Haley stopped by every afternoon with coffee and a soft joke to lighten the air. You're officially the town's most famous almost bride, she teased once. I managed a small laugh. Yeah, I said. At least the flowers were beautiful. It was the first time I'd been able to joke about it, and she smiled, knowing that tiny moment mattered. Over time, I began to see life again in little things. the way sunlight filtered through the shop window, the smell of fresh lavender when I opened a new delivery box, the sound of my dad humming out of tune in the kitchen when I visited him. Each day, something small reminded me that the world hadn't ended, no matter how much it had changed. I also started going to therapy. It wasn't easy talking about it all, the lies, the humiliation, the fear that I'd never trust anyone again. But it helped me understand that what Ryan did wasn't my failure. It wasn't a reflection of my worth or my ability to love. It was his sickness, not my weakness. My therapist told me something I'll never forget. Forgiveness isn't about setting him free. It's about setting yourself free from his shadow. One evening, while cleaning out old drawers in the shop, I found a box of photos, pictures from the engagement, my bridal shower, and those first happy days with Ryan. I sat on the floor, going through them one by one. There we were, laughing in front of the harbor, posing with friends, cutting cake. Every smile looked real. But now, I could finally see the truth behind them. He wasn't in love with me. He was in love with the control, the performance, the illusion of being someone's dream man. I could have burned those photos. Instead, I put them in a plain brown box, taped it shut, and wrote on the lid, "What I survived." I placed it in the storage closet and walked away. It wasn't about holding on anymore. It was about acknowledging that it happened, that I lived through it, and that I was still here. A few months later, I decided to expand my flower shop. I started hosting workshops on weekends, teaching people how to arrange flowers and build bouquets. It became more than a business. It became therapy. Every time someone smiled while creating something beautiful with their hands, I felt a little more whole. One Saturday, an older woman approached me after class. She said softly, "I know who you are. I watched your story on the news. You were very brave." I smiled, embarrassed, but she took my hand and added, "You reminded me that it's never too late to start over. My husband left me after 30 years. I thought my life was over, but watching you rebuild yours gave me hope." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself, not the woman who'd been betrayed or humiliated, but the woman who survived it. The woman who learned to plant new roots after everything she'd built was ripped away. My dad often came by to help with deliveries. One day, as we loaded flowers into his truck, he looked at me with a proud smile. "You did it, kiddo. You found yourself again." I nodded. I think I finally understand what Mom meant when she used to say heartbreak can either bury you or grow you. I chose to grow. He chuckled softly. She'd be proud. That evening, I took a long drive to the beach, the same place Ryan had proposed. The sky was golden and the tide was low. I sat on the sand, watching the water slide in and out, erasing footprints with every wave. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the engagement ring. For months, I couldn't bring myself to let it go. It wasn't about the stone or the memories. It was about letting go of the version of me who believed I couldn't live without him. I stood up, looked out over the ocean, and whispered, "I forgive you, but I'm done carrying you." Then I threw the ring as far as I could. It disappeared into the waves, swallowed by the sea, and in that moment, I felt lighter than I had in years. When I returned home, I wrote in my journal, a habit I'd started in therapy. I wrote, "I lost the man I loved, but I found the woman I was meant to become." That sentence became my truth. Months later, my flower shop was thriving again. People stopped associating me with scandal and started knowing me for my work. I even began receiving letters from women who'd heard my story, some thanking me for sharing it, others telling me theirs. I realized that surviving heartbreak isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about using it to build something stronger than what was broken. Now, when I think about that day at the altar, I don't feel shame or anger. I feel gratitude. That voice that shouted, "Don't kiss him," didn't just save me from marrying the wrong man. It saved me from losing myself completely. I walk through my flower shop every morning, breathing in the scent of roses and jasmine, and I smile. Life didn't turn out the way I planned, but in a strange, beautiful way, it turned out better, because I found peace, purpose, and the kind of strength no lie could ever take away. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to my channel and comment below where you're watching from. And remember, sometimes the most painful endings are the beginnings that finally set you free.